All right, let's get started. Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. This is Anand here, your host for today's event in the series that we have for Commerce Conversation. Today, we are going to talk about when Adobe Commerce makes sense. This is going to be extremely useful for merchants and organizations who are still using Magento Open Source. Now, there is a really good reason for you to stay in Magento Open Source if you consider the opportunity cost, if you consider everything else, and if it makes sense to stay in the Magento Open Source, great. But what we want here in this call is that we want to make sure that that decision is a considered decision. That is a decision that has been taken after considering all the aspects of what is it that Adobe Commerce has to offer, what are the parameters, what are the signals that you should be mindful of, which gives an indication that maybe the need of the platforms has evolved according to the business that you're running right now, and probably Adobe Commerce makes sense. So in this conversation, I will be joined by Mo Mohammed Nofal. I will pass on the baton to him to introduce himself. So Mo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anand. Yeah, so Mohammed Nofal here, better known as Mo. I've been lucky enough to be in and around the ecosystem for some time now. I was the first enterprise executive hired in the UK when Adobe launched, at the time Magento, when Magento launched Magento 2 and Magento Cloud. And I've gone through the acquisition by Adobe and come out the other side. So been in and around the ecosystem for the last 7 or 8 years. So very pleased to be here and spoken to many prospects and customers that are on open source and considering a move to commerce. So always happy to be involved in these types of conversations. Over to you, Sarvesh.
Great.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sarvesh. I wear a commercial hat at Renosys here, and I've been involved with this e-commerce business for more than 10 years, and in the tech space for almost some 18 to 20 years so far. And I often get involved in understanding pressing challenges and aspirations of our clients and prospects here at Renosys. I work with them with an intent to understand how best a technology can help them and remove any of the challenges they have. In the past experience, I've seen a lot of organizations migrating to Adobe Commerce, primarily with the aspirations to scale up their business and improve the customer experience. At times, this decision is not thought through very well. In several cases, instead of investing in the Adobe Commerce licenses, it might be better where you could spend on some activities which could gain maximum value from the current open source platform itself. So thank you, Anand, for inviting me to this discussion. Let me hand over right now to Saurabh, who is the Director of Technology at Renosys, to introduce himself. Saurabh has been a part of many such migrations in his past. Over to you, Saurabh.
Well, thank you, Sarvesh. I'm Saurabh Modi. I provide strategic guidance and advise on various aspects of technology and digital commerce. I'm working very closely to our clients and prospects as Director of Technology at Renosys. And I have been extremely involved in Adobe Commerce ecosystem. I have all Adobe Commerce certification, all level of Adobe Commerce certifications, as well as have been Adobe Commerce instructor for lynda.com, which is now known as LinkedIn Learning, as well as working as an SME for Adobe Commerce to write all Adobe Commerce certification exam questions. Looking forward for the discussion today.
Great. Well, Mo, Sarvesh, and Saurabh, pleasure to have you here, and thank you for agreeing to contribute in this forum with your knowledge and with your expertise. Saurabh, I will kick off this conversation by asking you a very simple questions, right? What are the key differences between Magento Open Source and Adobe Commerce that merchants should be mindful of?
Okay. Well, if you see Magento historically, there were two lines of product. One is open source, which was known as Community Edition, and the other one was Enterprise Edition. But after Magento being acquired by Adobe, when we talk about Magento in general, we are talking about this open source version. whereas the enterprise edition is now known as Adobe Commerce. But within Adobe Commerce as well, we have two further verticals. We have Adobe Commerce as well as Adobe Commerce Cloud. So in nutshell, like the open source version is now known as Magento, whereas the enterprise version goes under the Adobe Commerce umbrella. And typically the key differences that I see, one is of course in terms of licensing and cost. So because Magento is open source, it's free. Whereas with Adobe Commerce, it comes with a licensing cost. But when we see this licensing cost, there are other costs involved as well. For example, when you have Magento, you would be hosting it yourself. So you would need that environment and hosting and infrastructure related costs. Then there would be a competency cost to manage this environment and infrastructure. You would have, multiple requirement in terms of resources. So those additional costs are also there. But with Adobe Commerce, you would find that, when you go with Adobe Commerce Cloud, Adobe is hosting that on your behalf. So you would have, you don't require those competencies within your company. So there is a licensing cost, but there is, additional cost, which you can also foresee. Apart from that, there are features and functionalities as well, which is one of the key things, because with Magento, it comes with, certain out of the box feature. Whereas with Adobe Commerce, all the features which are there in Magento, they are there. But on top of that, you see a B2B implementation that you can very easily do with Adobe Commerce. There are content staging, returns, refunds. So multiple functionalities which are required in an enterprise implementation. You found them out of the box available in Adobe Commerce. So that's one of the key differences as well, that it's a feature-rich platform. One of the key things that I also see is support and service level SLAs as well, because when you go with Magento, you're managing and hosting yourself. So you have to manage all of that. Mm-hmm. But with Adobe Commerce, mm-hmm. you see that, Adobe is doing on your behalf. So there is that additional, mm-hmm. Support and SLAs as well.
Great. So Saurabh, what you are saying is Adobe Commerce is more mature as a platform. It is more geared towards fulfilling the needs of an enterprise. Is that what you are alluding to, Saurabh?
Absolutely. So when we say that, someone needs an enterprise-ready scalable platform, which can grow with your business growth as well as your business vision, probably Adobe Commerce is the direction. But when you are, just starting up, or you are fine with, what comes out of the box with, minimal e-commerce implementation requirements, then Magento can be a way to start as well.
All right, great. Thank you for highlighting these, Saurabh. So Mo, you get involved in discussions like this day in and day out, right?
Absolutely.
Would you like to add on to the commentary that Saurabh has made on these differences?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Saurabh, look, you did a great job there. I think I'm going to pull you in more frequently than I do in the initial conversations. But there isn't a lot for me to add. Maybe expand upon what Saurabh went through there. And I think it's very important when we first have conversations with businesses to do exactly what Saurabh did, and to break down the differences, between community as it was then known and enterprise, and how that's morphed into open source and commerce. Although, essentially it's the same principles. They're both built on open source technology. They're both accessible and can be customized. And this is where we start getting into where it makes sense to move from open source to commerce. And it all depends on the business. There are some businesses out there that can make open source work for them for a very, very long time. But there are other businesses that have maybe some complexity within there, or as I like to put it, have one or more of the 4 S's. And those 4 S's being security concerns, scalability, support, or speed. If any of those are of concern or are something that they want to focus on and is part of their kind of GTM strategy, then absolutely it's definitely worth having a conversation with us so that we can let you know what those look like on commerce. Because of course, open source by nature comes with very, very little security. There are updates and bug fixes and patches, but that's not monitored by anybody apart from the business themselves, which is completely at odds with commerce because we do offer full PCI certification. and being on our cloud network, underpinned by AWS or Azure, the choice is up to the customer. They have that peace of mind there. And then in terms of scalability, being on AWS or Azure, you are talking about almost limitless scalability at the touch of a button. Support, there is zero support with open source, and this does help out the ecosystem, and it shows how strong and resilient the ecosystem is in terms of support. But with Adobe, you would get support directly from us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You get a dedicated UK-based account manager if you're in the UK, and also various levels of support, technical account managers and launch managers if it's cloud they're looking at. And then the final S, speed. Because you are on those networks, and you are using enterprise-grade solutions and technologies from the likes of Fastly for the CDN and DDoS mitigation, then it really does add to the site being faster, more secure, with added support and added security. So those are the kind of 4 S's. There's a lot more, as Saurabh alluded to. I'm sure later on in the conversation we'll get to the differences in features and functionality, but I wanted to talk about those S's that add value to a business and help them to grow.
Great. Thank you, Mo. I think what you have mentioned is really important, and the key point here is the scalability. I think as your business starts to become more and more mature, when you start to attract more and more clients, that's when you really start to think that what is the impact of having the slow speed? What is the impact of having a security risk on all the clients that you're making? So the moment you feel that your business is ready for scale, I think that is probably one of the key signs that maybe you are also ready for an enterprise-grade solution, to make sure that you are future-proofing yourself.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Mo. So, Sarvesh, very quickly, we talked about when probably it makes sense, what are the key differences between Magento Open Source and Adobe Commerce. From your perspective, when does it make sense for people to stay on open source?
So, firstly, selecting the right platform for any of the business, it is a very, very, complex process. And complex, when I say, means it is not to understand where we are currently. It also includes what our vision is, like where do you want to be after 2 years or 3 years down the line. So I know a lot of time, when it is also important to consider, what your target audience is going to look like today. Are you going to increase your segments in the future? Are you going to expand your user base? So there are a lot of factors that come in. And also important are the platform costs, those are involved, the return on investment that you are expecting. So when we talk about the open source, it is a free version of the commerce application, and it is very much suitable for small businesses who is currently not doing a very large amount of business. And in order to improve your store's functionality, there are a lot of extensions those are available. I mean, you don't need to do complex coding there, but there are already ready-made plugins those are available, which you can quickly plug and play, and your features get activated on the open source version itself. And these are available very readily, very easily on the marketplaces of Adobe. Adobe Commerce, on the other side, offers you a lot of features which comes out of the box, where you don't need extensions, you don't need coding, but it is already pre-built and incorporated into the platform. So that's the advantage of Adobe Commerce. And the primary advantage that you look at is the commercial, because certainly any business that is running also look at the cost at a very, very critical, sensitive aspects of it. So Adobe Commerce provides you the features and functionalities that maybe you will have to rebuild on the Adobe Open Source edition sometimes. And majorly, if you break it down, the primary parameters that we look at, whenever we compare or whenever we think about migrating to the commerce platform, are the cost, what is the scalability, what we are looking at, what is the, the kind of growth we are looking at, what are the security, as already highlighted by everybody of you, security plays a very, very key role in technology. And Adobe Enterprise comes with that additional security and, of course, the features. Adobe Commerce has its own license fees, which is certainly a lot when you compare to Adobe Open Source, because it is free of the cost. So that comes the very first part where any of the enterprise would like to think about when they are investing in Adobe Commerce. And in case you are not able to grow with that pace that you have anticipated, so like in the paid version, it becomes an additional cost for you. It doesn't make sense. So at times it is appropriate to invest more on the features or maybe something customization if you would like to explore in the open source. And maybe once you reach to a certain level, once you reach to some level of business, maybe $1 million at least, you can start thinking in that line that you move on to Adobe Commerce. So anyways, when we talk about even though open source is a free version, it gives you all the features that you could actually utilize to go to the market and to understand all your various e-commerce processes. So Adobe Commerce, typically, I would say it frees up your team's time and maybe the brain power, when you want to focus more on the strategy rather than, looking a lot into nitty-gritties of the features, because Adobe Commerce comes out of the box quite a lot of things. So it's both of them are responsive. So it is, quite a lot of parameters that we need to think about when we are migrating or actually thinking about migration. And here it is very important to call the right subject matter experts. When I call subject matter experts, people like, Saurabh, who understands the key aspects, who can dig deep into the system and can suggest you, that this is the right time for you to migrate, depending on the kind of task you are, depending on the kind of mission you are planning. So,
all right. Thank you, Sarvesh, for giving some insight into when would it make sense for people to stay on open source. Maybe when they're starting, when they're ensuring that they found their product market fit, making sure that they understand what their target market is, how their GTM would look like, understand that what is the potential size of their market and start to ramp up their business. Probably on those circumstances when the needs are simple, when the risk of low speed, the risk of security is manageable, it would probably be okay for them to stay on the open source. Mo, from your experience, when people make that jump from open source to Adobe Commerce, what are the key drivers? When in their mind does it make sense for them to start thinking about Adobe Commerce and going on that journey?
Very good question. And look, don't think that we don't deal with startups and businesses that are going online for the first time, that want to have that knowledge that there's the security, the safety, the support there of beginning their commerce journey on Adobe Commerce. But you're right. For some businesses, it doesn't make sense. And in those cases, it tends to be those that maybe are more simplistic in terms of the products that they sell in their go-to-market. Selling a T-shirt in 4 colors and 4 sizes, and having low inventory, possibly just B2C, is probably not the right solution for us. And I would normally advise a customer of that. And once they start to scale and grow, maybe look at B2B, including B2B in there, or having more complex products, then that's normally the time that would be best to start speaking with us, and we can start showing you what we can offer in terms of value on commerce.
Mm-hmm. Great. So when we talk about open source, right, one of the main thing that people talk about open source is that there is no cost. But we have seen with our experience that there is always a hidden cost. So Mo, help us understand what are the different hidden costs involved in managing an open source project?
Very, very good question. And this is where we start to get into the nitty-gritty of things, as it were. So look, when I first joined Magento many years ago, it was a nice analogy. It was explained to me that, look, open source in general is like Lego. It's like building blocks. And then you work with a partner, an esteemed partner like Renesys, to put those building blocks together, depending on what it is you require. But bear in mind, the more building blocks you get, or Lego pieces that you get, the more complex it becomes, the more difficult it will become to maintain as you scale and grow. And, you know, if you want to build a house or multiple houses, does it make sense to keep building them using Lego, or should you start getting some real bricks in and start scaling in that way? So that comes, of course, with extra costs. But if you're building on Lego and you're trying to maintain that, you have to get experts in to support. You have to start getting larger infrastructure. All of this adds to cost. And then it comes to a point where, you know what, it would probably be cheaper to build using real bricks. And again, this is where we would come to a partner like Renesys for them to figure out what that looks like. But in terms of cost and hidden costs, absolutely. Once you start scaling, you're looking at extra costs in terms of hosting. You start becoming more attractive to unsavory people online in terms of DDoS attacks and security vulnerabilities, and them, you know, actively looking for them. At the end of last year, there was a huge hack on open source with, you know, tens of thousands of businesses affected. And of course now, if any customer details are compromised, then I believe it's 4 or 5% of total company turnover that is the fine. So I'm pleased to say that only affected open source customers. We had 0 customers on Adobe Commerce Cloud that were affected by that. So you've got to start taking these into consideration, not only total cost of ownership, but opportunity cost of remaining on what is essentially a non-secure, non-supported open source platform.
Great. And you mentioned about the opportunity cost move, which I think should be considered diligently when making that decision, because I'm assuming that there are a lot of features that are readily available in Adobe Commerce that will take a long time in open source environment to be built and to be rolled out from a merchant's perspective, right?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's normally what I leave to the end. And it looks like we are approaching on time. And what I like to begin with is, like I talked about, the 4 S's, where the value is built. But then if we start to talk if we start talking about a like for like in terms of features and functionality, you know, Adobe Commerce is on another level completely. Just glossing over these, but things like B2B, having the ability to create quotes, requisition lists, custom pricing, and being able to manage those inside of Commerce without the need to build them or integrate with any third parties. Things like artificial intelligence powered by Adobe Sensei for product recommendations and search. You know, this then adds to personalization, again, which is part of the commerce solution. Being able to put the right product at the right time, at the right price in front of the right customer. And that's what customers are expecting now. There have been a number of different pieces of research conducted on customer expectations. And a lot of them have said, you know, if they go to a site that doesn't recognize who they are and maybe is putting women's clothes in front of them instead of men's, as an example, we can go a lot more granular than that, then they will choose not to shop there again, because it doesn't recognize who they are and what their needs are and what is relevant to them. Then we've got things like segmentation, staging and preview, and the list goes on and on and on. And it's not just having this extra functionality out of the box. Absolutely, it's great, but it's core functionality. It's part and parcel of the license and of the technology. So if we're talking about the opportunity cost, Anand, then absolutely the opportunity cost is going out there, finding these different technologies, purchasing the individual licenses for them, managing those licenses, then integrating them into the platform itself. And then anytime there's any upgrades, bug fixes or patches, the business then has to go in again and make sure that all of those are compatible and there hasn't been anything broken. Whereas if the functionality is out of the box, there's no need to do that, Anand. So yes, there's a lot of benefit if we just talk about features and functionality of what you would get with commerce over open source.
Great. Thank you for highlighting these hidden costs of staying on open source when there is no real business case for merchants to do so. And good that you brought the topic of integration and the topic of finding out what those point solutions could be that needs to be integrated in an open source environment. So, Saurabh, I will bring this up to you. From a technology perspective, what are the signs that the platform strategy should be reevaluated?
Mhm. Well, generally, platform strategy and evaluation, I broadly divide it into two parts. One is in terms of aspiration. Your business is growing. You have, your vision. Your goals are, changing, and so on. So based on that, if your current platform is, let's say, not able to scale as your business grows, so that's one of the, one of the key things that we have seen why people reevaluate, as well as the flexibility and customization capabilities within the platform itself. Because in past we have seen a lot of platforms were monolith only, and now people moving towards microservices. So flexibility, as well as using features like AI based recommendations, they are very popular, and people demand them that they needs to be there in e-commerce. But if you are in a platform where you don't see all of these features, or you are not flexible enough to customize them and build them for your customers' need, then that is one more sign that I've seen. But the second criteria is where you get continuous escalation and issues internally, and problems not only in terms of managing the technology stack, but because you are now on a outdated technology stack, so it's harder for your HR to even find the resources for that technology stack now. The cost of resources also increase, and as well as you also see performance and security related issues. So outdated technology is one of the key reason as well. And apart from that, experience of customer is in the heart of e-commerce. And when you see that your platform is not able to deliver that, not only from business point of view, but from technology point of view as well, if you feel limited, so that's also one more sign that a better platform can be, you can move towards a better platform.
Mm-hmm. All right, Saurabh. So what you are saying is that when, as a merchant, you start to feel that the pain that you are feeling in terms of managing the platform, managing the integration, finding the resources to make the progress that you really need to make to reach the goals that you may have for yourself, that's a good sign. If you think that the aspiration that you have from the platform is no longer being met by the platform, probably a good sign for you to start thinking about replatforming. So we are coming towards the end of this particular session, but before we wrap, there's one very important question that I need to ask you, Mo. Are there any specific business models that are supported better by Adobe Commerce than Magento?
Yes and no. So Adobe Commerce can support pretty much any business out there, regardless of complexity. But what we tend to find is those that have, multiple go-to-market routes, B2B, B2C, hybrid, B2B2C, the list goes on. But when there's that complexity there, they tend to benefit a lot more from Adobe Commerce in terms of the features and functionality that's out of the box. But, we work with businesses selling single products, but want to be able to have that safety, security, and scalability available to them, and support.
Mm-hmm. Great. So from what you are saying is that there are no specific business model that are more appropriate for Adobe Commerce, because the platform is so versatile that pretty much any use case that you may have, which can be served by digital commerce, Adobe Commerce can certainly fulfill those needs.
Yes, absolutely. And in some businesses, because they're just starting out, they may not be complex to begin with, but as they scale and grow, the complexity comes in. They want to address new markets, or different languages, different currencies, different go-to-market strategies. But by having Adobe Commerce in there as the foundation of which the business is based, all of that is possible in the future.
Great. Thank you, Mo. So we are right at the top of the hour. It's the time that we allocated for this conversation. But before we wrap, Any parting thoughts from you, Saurabh?
Well, no, I think me and Mo have explained it really well. So I'll leave to you guys if you want to share anything else.
All right. I think, sorry, before we go there is a question from Firoz. So let me bring Firoz in. Firoz, we are bringing you in the conversation. You are now a speaker. Please contribute, Firoz.
Hi, guys. Thank you for the talk. Was really informational. Really appreciate it. My question was more to do with commerce versus Shopify. I don't know if anyone's interested in this subject, but actually I wanted to ask in which situations you might choose commerce over Shopify. Thank you.
Mo, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, more than happy to. Again, conversation that I have on a very regular basis, almost as frequently as I have on open source. But look, again, if a business, if all they're looking for is something relatively simplistic, and I'm going to use the example again because Shopify is known in the kind of clothing and apparel and retail space. Look, if you've got a pretty simplistic product with limited variations, you're selling in one country or one market, then you know what? Shopify is a great solution. I'm not knocking it. And it's great for certain kinds of businesses, maybe those that are just starting out, don't know what route they want to take in the future. But where we kind of excel against Shopify and see lots of businesses moving over from Shopify to Adobe Commerce is, again, those things that I've mentioned around scalability, selling in what I like to call the multis. So that's multiple languages, multiple currencies, multiple storefronts, all of these things. Although Shopify has made some ground in there, it's still not up to where Adobe Commerce is. The same with B2B. They have got some B2B functionality, but Adobe top right-hand corner when it comes to Forrester and Gartner time and time again for both B2B and B2C. So yeah, summing it up, look, simplistic kind of business, one route to market, one currency, one language, no B2B. You know, Shopify is a great solution. Once that shifts and the business scales, grows, and has complexity there, that's when we start speaking with Shopify customers that have kind of outgrown the platform.
Great answer, Mo. And I think what you have highlighted, the way you have put it, multis against Shopify and 4Ss against open source. So whoever is reevaluating a platform, whoever is considering an e-commerce platform, probably it is important to keep these two phrases in mind, multis and 4Ss. Great way to put it, Mo. Saurabh, you were going to comment on this question as well, right?
Yeah, so one key thing that I've seen from technical point of view is, so whenever you do any customization within Shopify, you typically follow a plugin approach. So, and those plugin needs to reside outside the Shopify environment. So there is, an investment that you have around Shopify, but then for all the customization, those apps that you are creating or the plugins that you're creating, those apps reside outside, and then there is an infrastructure cost around that. But what happens is if, let's say, Shopify is promising you a very high availability, all these third-party apps that you're going to use or you're going to build, those apps may not be, that highly available. So that reduces the availability of the website and reliability overall. And that's where, Adobe Commerce is also having a upper hand, because all the customization that you would want to do, you can reside within one single code base. Or if you want to, scatter them around, that is also possible. But within Shopify, you have to keep them outside the Shopify's own infrastructure.
Great. Thank you for putting the technical angle to it, Saurabh. We have taken 5 minutes more than what we hope to take. But before we wrap, any parting thoughts from any one of you? I'll wait for a couple of seconds.
Look, it's always a pleasure to talk through this. And if there is anybody on the line that would like to talk about this in more detail, then please just drop me a note and we'll set up a call. And I'm more than happy to spend as much time as it takes. We can do a return on investment breakdown with you, whatever it takes. And ultimately, we want you to be comfortable with your existing site and where you want to take your business in the future.
Sure. And by the way, Mo and me, both of us will be at the Retail Technology Show in London tomorrow. So if you happen to be in London and if you happen to be attending Retail Technology Show, please feel free to send a message. We'll be very happy to meet you and continue the conversation.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, if there are no more thoughts, then thank you everyone for tuning in. Glad that you could give us your time and join this conversation. Thank you, Mo, Sarvesh, Saurabh, and Firoz for contributing in this conversation. Really appreciate. And I hope to see you again in future commerce conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.